Okay. All right. It's great to see you all as we are gearing up for another wonderful Tanya Tuesday. And today's topic is going to be faith, though it's not the exact first section. It is the second section, which is longer. And in the first section, we're actually going to talk for a moment about anger. We're going to talk about anger. But before I get to that, let's give a little history. In chapter 29, we have been talking what happens if no matter what you try, spirituality is missing. Spirituality is not coming to you. And so we explained that it's possible that your body is getting in the way, the coarseness of your physicality is getting in the way, and therefore you need to find ways to break your body. We quoted from a Zohar, like a big log of wood, you need to break it apart in order to allow spirituality. So it could be for whatever reason, too much chocolate cake, too much TV, too much, I don't know, whatever it is, everybody has their own things. Your body is just not allowing the spirituality. So though you're working hard, your body and your animal soul is not allowing spirituality. And so we gave different pieces of advice. We spoke about self-deflating sessions. So even though generally we believe in positivity, there are times when if you try the positive and you try and it doesn't work, sometimes you might need to break the coarseness of your animalistic soul in order to allow your godly soul to break through. And so today we're going to have another method, which is also unusual, something that we're not really supposed to use. And nevertheless, we're going to use it here. And that is, of course, anger. So some of you may be familiar. Anger is a character trait that can cause lots and lots of problems. I was just studying Maimonides a couple days ago with my son. He has a section over there about character traits. In one place, he writes, in general, all character traits, you should try and stick to the middle. And he says anger is really bad, except sometimes you need to show some anger. And then another place he says anger is always bad. So it's very interesting in the commentaries to discuss it, but nevertheless, you get the idea that anger is a very dangerous proposition. Even if, in the old school, you use anger in your home and show your kids that you're angry, but you have to be careful. You have to be careful with that. It can be totally used and abused. They tell the story of a therapist that a guy came to his therapist and said he was very angry. So the therapist said, "What I want you to do is write letters to the people that you hate and then burn them." So the guy said, "I tried it, and but I don't know what to do with all the letters that I have." Okay, all right, so we'll leave it over there. So with that being said. So what do we do with, so the anger that we're going to use is going to be getting angry at your animalistic soul. So again, though we generally shy away from anger, the Tanya here is going to tell us to spend a moment to get angry, literally angry at your animal soul. Why does this help? What's the whole purpose here? The whole purpose here is that, again, you're doing the right things to allow spirituality into your life. The problem is the evil and the animal soul within you has, so to speak, run amok. It's too powerful right now. And so you need to find ways to, so to speak, break it. So one of the ways of breaking it is by getting angry at it. We know how people shirk when people get angry at them, right? Anybody ever screamed at you or get angry at you? We kind of fall apart, right? We all have difficulty dealing with people getting angry at us. Some people grow thick skin, but generally, most of us have trouble when someone gets angry at us. We're shell-shocked. We fall apart. It takes time to build ourselves back up. Even if we're totally in the right, experiencing someone's anger is never, ever fun. And so what the Tanya is going to say is use anger against your animal soul, call it all types of names, tell it how bad it is, and that will hopefully break its grip. So we're going to read that section, and then we'll get to the section of what I mentioned in my text, which is about faith. So let's take a look here. Let's share. Let's share. Share. Okay. Let's go over here. Okay. Let me hide this. Okay. So we are at the bottom of the page over here where it says section 6. It's on page 334. It's not going to take us very long. We're going to get through this section over here about getting angry at your animal soul. And so he says like this: in addition to being repulsed at your animal soul, you should employ a further technique of encouraging your divine soul to become enraged with your animal soul, with a thunderous voice of anger in your head to humble the Sitra Achra. Sitra Achra means the other side. Okay? As our sages have said, of blessed memory taught, a person should always make his impulse to good angry at his impulse to evil. As the verse states, get angry and don't sin. So this advice of the Tanya is rooted in the Talmud. The Talmud says, always anger your godly soul over your animalistic soul. So again, though anger in general is something we shy away from, but to use anger against your animal soul is okay. Okay? So how does that look? Meaning to say, get angry with your animal soul, i.e. your impulse to evil, with a thunderous voice of anger in your head, and say to it, you are bad, sinful, disgusting, repulsive, and wretched, etc., along with all the similar terms which our sages of blessed memory have rightfully used for the impulse to evil. Say to your animal soul, for how much longer will you hide before the blessed infinite light? The Tanya offers a brief meditation on the nature of the infinite light. In other words, if we're trying to say how bad the animal soul is, we're talking about getting angry at the animal soul. You have to tell it true things. So one of the true things is you tell it you're bad, you're evil, you're repulsive. Now it's going to continue and say, knowing the truth that God is the truth, that God's light is everywhere, and the animal soul is just hiding me from realizing it, that means the animal soul is hiding the reality. And so that's another way to get angry at it. You're delusional. So let's continue. So he continues. So what is God? Good to see you, Baruch. An infinite light that floods all the worlds and is devoid of any limitations, such as simultaneously he was, he is, and he will be. All at once. That's God. And even in this very place where I stand, the infinite light shines, and his infinite light remains alone just as it was before the world was created, since there is no existence independent from his light. And since there is no new independent existence, and the infinite light has experienced no actual change, as the verse states, for I, God, have not changed, since God transcends time. And these are all things we spoke about in previous chapters. But let me try to get to the next page. There, okay. 1 second here. But you, wretched one, deny the self-evident truth that his presence, everything is considered zero, which is as obvious as if it were seen visibly. What is the result we can hope for when following all the above advice? So again, you're basically turning to your animal soul, telling it how bad it is, how delusional it is. And he continues, and through this, you will help the eyes of your divine soul to be enlightened by the non-dual reality of God's infinite light, with clarity and certainty normally associated with actual sensory vision, without the uncertainty which inevitably comes through using deduction and logic alone, as explained elsewhere, and this is the root of all worship. So the point that we get from this and the previous sections is, and it's also going to be in the next section as well, is really what comes out is that when spirituality is not working, or when we're not feeling a connection to God, or when we have doubts, or whatever it is, they're not actually real. It seems to be what the Tanya says. All you need to do is to be able to push aside the evil, and then your godly soul will shine. It's kind of similar to, we talk about light. We compare Judaism and goodness to light. What does light mean? Darkness is the absence of light. If you want to get rid of darkness, you don't push away the darkness, you shine a light, and automatically the darkness disappears. Or, though here it's kind of the opposite. Here you're getting rid of the darkness, and automatically the light shines. I just thought of that now. But the idea is that, the point of either description of it is there's not a war going on. In other words, we would imagine the light has to fight with the darkness. And here it kind of seems to say the moment the evil inclination is, good question, I'll answer that. The moment the evil inclination is minimized, automatically your godly soul will shine. I guess the best way to compare it to is if you have a dark home during the daylight and you have shades. The moment you move the shades, the sun shines. That's how I would compare it best. And so the same thing I would say is, truthfully, your godly soul is always connected to God or wants to shine. And sometimes what you need to do is you need to allow your godly soul to shine more. But sometimes that doesn't work. That's kind of how I see this chapter, right? Okay, so again, there's two ways to spirituality. One is work on your godly soul, let it overflow and overcome and overpower your animal soul. And sometimes what you need to do is move your animal soul aside, like opening up a curtain and allow the light in. And that's the advice of this chapter. It all depends what works for you, is really the general message. It depends what's going to work for you. Good to see you, David. So it really depends what works for you or what's not working for you. So the first stage, the first way to get spirituality, a feeling of closeness to God, is to um, keep working on the spirituality, and then one day it'll shine. But if that doesn't work, sometimes what you need to do is push aside your animal soul. And if you push aside your animal soul, like moving that curtain, your godly soul will allow it to shine. So, um, in this case, what does that mean? That means pushing aside your animal soul means literally getting angry at it, deflating it, calling it all types of names, and that's kind of how you move it out of the way. So someone asked a question here. Someone asked the question, what does it mean that everything in front of God is nothing? And I believe we spoke about it at length in chapters 20 and 21, and we'll speak about it again in the second section of Tanya, which will be in a long time. But the general idea is that everything in this world is completely dependent upon God. Everything in this world relies upon God every single moment for it to exist. And if God were not to vivify it every moment, it would not exist. It's not like God has to destroy anything; He has to stop making it exist. And therefore, in reality, nothing in this world really has its own existence. It's completely dependent on God. Not only that, if God were to reveal Himself, we wouldn't even see anything. We would see God because everything would be subsumed in His reality. It's a trick that we see things. The things that we see is basically God creating them and hiding Himself at the same time. But if we were to truly feel God's presence, which is actually kind of impossible while we're still alive, but if God were to reveal Himself, you wouldn't be able to see anything. You would not be able to perceive the reality of anything around you. There's actually stories that says that great righteous people, shortly before their death, they actually cease to see the physicality of the world. They see the world as spiritual. There's many stories of great tzaddikim. The Alter Rabbi, for one, on his deathbed, he told his son, "You see the lectern over there, the stender, the lectern, the place where people speak." He says, "I don't see it. I just see the word of God. I don't see the physicality of it anymore." This is very it's a totally different reality. A similar story is told in the Talmud. Just brings up the same idea that one time one of the great rabbis, his daughter, lit the Shabbat candles with vinegar instead of oil. She was all upset, and so the great tzaddik says the same way God can make oil light, God can make vinegar burn too, and the vinegar burned as well. So what was the idea there? Is that he was able to tap into the godly energy that's behind everything. And so there's really no difference in that stage between vinegar and oil. Most of us, though, cannot tap into that stage. Just along these lines, I want to share a story that I saw. There was a student in a Chabad yeshiva who was dealing with many doubts, and he wrote a letter to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe never answered him. But he said he didn't drop the Judaism, and he was still praying and learning and praying and learning. But the doubts stayed with him, and so he would not pray and learn and do mitzvahs with a lot of feeling because he had all these doubts of faith. And for whatever reason, the Rebbe never sent him a response, a letter. And then one day, suddenly it all clicked, and he started praying with great devotion, and he started doing mitzvahs with great devotion. He started studying with great devotion, and so his rabbi told him. The rabbi in the yeshiva told him, write a letter to the rabbi, tell him whatever issue you had is fixed, it's gone. So he wrote a letter, and the rabbi also told him, come to my house tonight, and we'll drink a cup of tea, and I'll tell you something. So he came to his house. He said, you should know, though the rabbi never sent you a response, every single month, I'll show you the letters, he would ask me about you. Every single month, he would ask how you're doing. So it's a very interesting story. So the Rebbe decided not to take the issue head on, decided not to respond to his doubts head on, decided to let him, so to speak, continue doing what he was doing, but he always checked in to find out how the student was doing. So the Rebbe had the time to respond to him, but he chose not to. what's the point? Obviously, every person is different. The Rebbe realized that for this student, for this um, what he needed was more time developing his spirituality. He needed um, more time to study and pray and to daven. And then one day it would click. The doubts, again, this all ties into what we're saying. The doubts, the issues, the darkness, they're not real. They're just the animal soul that has a certain power that God gives it to get in front of us, to not allow our godliness to shine within us. And so sometimes the advice is just continue at it, like this student here, and eventually it clicked. And sometimes we need these self-deflating sessions. We need to get angry at our animal soul, as we spoke about just now. But the point and the main thing to remember is that the evil and the doubts and the animal soul and the questions aren't real. God gives them power to hide the truth, but they are only there so that we can overcome. They're only there so that we can find a way to overcome. And how do you overcome it? It's in two ways. Either you go the direct path, you work on your spirituality directly, and then one day, boom, it'll flourish. Or another way is sometimes we need to get angry at our animal soul, push it off to the side, and then the godly soul will shine. And we'll that type will continue along in our discussion here, and they'll get into the question of faith, which is another
Rabbi.
thing. Yes.
So I'm not sure if using anger to fight your animal soul works for most people. I mean, for the most part, anger is not a very good emotion. And people who get angry, often they become emotionally hijacked. And I'm not sure that is going to be very helpful to someone that is trying to get more spiritual.
Right. So all of the this chapter had a couple ways to deal with your animal soul, and he's going to give another one soon. So anger is not the only one. He gives multiple paths, and the Alter Rebbe writes in the beginning of the Tanya that the whole Tanya is really answers to people's questions, and he has to give all the possibilities. And it will depend on your personality. And as he even writes at the beginning of the book of Tanya, that everybody should go to their mentor if they're not sure what to use. So just imagine someone comes to the Rebbe and tells them about their spiritual issues. And so we have multiple possibilities of how to deal with it based on what we've been reading till now. One possibility is continue along, developing your spirituality, and one day it'll flourish. Another option is as we said, take a moment of self-deflation. Talk about how, so to speak, get depressed about your spiritual situation was another option. It's not anger, depression, not depression actually, sadness and bitterness. Then another option was it might be that you need to upgrade your teshuvah, your repentance. It might be that then he brings other ways of getting sad over your spiritual situation. He brings, if you're having bad dreams, then he brings anger over here, and then he's going to bring another section. No, sorry, section 7 is not another option. So he's bringing all different options. He's not saying which one is which. That's why I preface the story with Maimonides. Maimonides says in one place one should use righteous anger sometimes, and another place says you should never have anger. And so there's kind of this balance. And I guess maybe the answer really depends on who. But it is very interesting that Maimonides, literally a chapter apart, one place writes you should never get angry, another place writes you could have righteous anger. It was very interesting. So yes, we have to be very careful with anger, and if you do use it in correct doses. But it's like any other medication. It's like steroids. Okay, steroids is a very dangerous medication, but it's also very powerful and very helpful. And sometimes that is what's needed to be used. If someone in connection with their mentor decides that's not the antidote for them, that's fine. We're not saying that that's always the antidote, but it will be the antidote for some people. Someone writes here, righteous anger. Yes. Pure acetic acid, since it was flammable. Wouldn't put it on your salad. Okay. Okay, it's possible. Uh, um, I do like to say I am a acidic Jew. So I do like the vinegar. All right, but be that as it may, we're getting now to the last section. The last section is really where he ties all this together, where he basically says, why do all of these pieces of advice work? Why does getting sad over your spiritual state, or why does getting angry at your animal soul, why does it work when logically you would think it doesn't work? In other words, the logic tells you if spirituality is not working, you just need to become more spiritual, work on your spirituality more. Why do these work? And his answer basically is what I told you. His answer is that that evil, darkness, doesn't really exist. God gives it a certain power to appear powerful, to appear great, to appear as if it can hide on the truth. But the truth is that the moment you push it aside, your true will and desire will appear. I'll just give a halachic example. There's a fascinating Jewish law. The Jewish law says when a man gives his wife a get, a bill of divorce, he has to give it to her willingly. Then there's a law, what if the guy doesn't want to give it willingly? So then it says you beat him up until he says, I want to give it. So the question is, if you're beating him up, how much does he want it? Does he really
Wait,
want
is
it?
that true, Rabbi?
Yes, it is. It is. This is true. It's true. Do
That's
do
funny.
do they actually do this today? The answer is, well, it's not legal in America. There was actually a group of rabbis going around doing
That's
it.
unfortunate.
It made big news. There were rabbis going around with cattle prodders. They would come and zap some guys. You can find the news. There's stories about it. There's a group of rabbis who go around undercover and beat people up, and then zap them. And some of them went to jail. Some of these rabbis, because kind of can't do that in America. But what's their basis? Their basis is on Jewish law. The Jewish law basically says that if a guy doesn't want to give his wife a get, you can't beat him up until he says, "I want to give it." The question is, when he says, "I want to give it," does he really want to give it? He's been beaten up. So the answer that Maimonides says is because really he does want to give it, because giving the get at this point is a mitzvah. So when a Jew says they want to do a mitzvah, even if it seems like they're being forced, you're only forcing their animal soul to agree to what their godly soul wants, and therefore it's valid. In other words, he's saying in the core of every single Jew, every single person is to want to do God's will. We have an animal soul that hides on that. We have an animal soul that does not allow that desire to do the right thing to appear. But the moment we put the animal soul in its place and the godly soul, and the person says, I want to do it, then they're really aligned with their true will, with their godly soul. It's a crazy law, but we see from this law what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here is true. Is that evil, falsehood, has no feet. Falsehood is not real. It is the absence of truth. It is hiding on what is true. And this is why God creates. This is the whole reason God creates evil and darkness, even though it's not true and it's not real, is for us to overcome it, is for us to want to be able to become greater over it. Okay? It's interesting that because we're having the story of Purim. In the story of Purim, you have in chapter 2 the story of Esther becoming the queen. Then in the 3rd chapter, it says after this story, the king made Haman very great. That's how the 3rd chapter starts. So the Hasidic commentators point out that what this means is that the only reason Haman became great was only after Esther became queen. In other words, only after the way to bring down Haman came about, only then Haman became great. That's what it means. After this story, Haman became great. Evil is only there so that good should ultimately overcome it. So good had to come first. Evil is only there so that the salvation that comes from the evil is even greater than before. We have also in the story of Passover. It says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Why did he harden Pharaoh's heart? So that God will make more miracles. So the reason for the evil is so that we can overcome it, so that we can push it over and create greater light. The whole point of what I'm trying to tell you now is to remember in your mind that darkness has no standing. Darkness has no tangible or credible power. It is only there to create a facade that you can later overcome. It says when Mashiach comes, it says that the righteous people will cry and say, wow, how is it that we overcame this great mountain, referring to the evil inclination? And the wicked will cry, how come we couldn't overcome this little bump? Meaning, why couldn't we overcome the evil? Why couldn't we overcome this inclination? It's just a little bump. And so the commentaries explain, what does that mean? Is the evil inclination a mountain or is it a bump? The answer is both are true. It looks like a mountain, but really it's just a bump. It looks really difficult, but really there's nothing there. There's really, it's really nothing. It's very easy to overcome. So let's take a look at a little bit further in Tanya. Okay, let's take a look at this. All right, and again, this will get into faith, and he's going to bring a fascinating story from the Torah, because the truth is that all this will tie into faith as well. And basically, his point, if you follow where I'm going, because I said what to do when you have questions of faith, it comes out from what I'm saying as well, is that the truth and the core of you is really you believe. If you're having doubts in your faith, those doubts aren't real. They're really just for you to overcome. And so if you can find a way to push away those doubts, then they'll actually disappear. It's weird. It's interesting. Just to give an example, there were a lot of people that wrote letters to the Rabbi on faith and science. And to some of these people, the Rebbe would write long pages and pages of answers to their questions. And then, oddly enough, he would end off the letter and say, but for a believing Jew, we really don't need any of this. And we just believe, and we know it's true. And so you read that letter, and you're like, so why did you give the whole answer? Because you need to hear the answer to, so to speak, assuage your questioning. But then he ends off, you should know the truth is that you really believe. That's really the reality. The reality is that we truly do believe. The questions are the questions there, but it's a fine point. It's a very difficult point, but that's, I believe, what comes out of this chapter is that on the one hand, evil, doubt, questions can appear very powerful. At the same time, they can also be pushed off very easily. And I would say most people that come to a great level of faith is generally not because they had their questions answered. The questions that you have answered just, so to speak, quiets a little bit of the nagging. But the great faith is its own thing. It's not so connected to answering your questions. So I appreciate the intellectual answers of Judaism. Don't get me wrong. But ultimately, your faith is not, in other words, you don't believe because I answered my technical questions. I answered my questions on evolution. I answered my questions on the age of the world. I answered my questions on dinosaurs. I answered my questions on the veracity of the Torah. Those are all helpful and necessary and should be listened to, but they're not the source of your faith. That's important to remember. So let's take a look here in the text. Let us take a look here in the text. Okay, so he says like this. He says, okay. So he says, the reason why these conversations with the animal soul are effective is because in reality, the Sitra Achra has no substance at all. The Sitra Achra, that's the other side, can only conceal the truth, but it has no real power. Once its lie is exposed, its allure is neutralized. And that is why the Sitra Achra is compared to darkness, since darkness has no substance at all and will be effortlessly banished by the light. So he's saying darkness is an easy pushover. Now, it's interesting. I said earlier, but at the end of the day, we are not lighting a light to get rid of the darkness. In this case, we're just moving the curtain. But the point is the same, that darkness is easy to get rid of. And so he continues, while the Sitra Achara, the other side, seems to have considerable substance, since it has a lot of energy with which it animates all the non-kosher animals. Okay, so again, this goes back to chapter 7, where non-kosher animals are animated from the Sitrach, or the other side. So he continues, as well as the animal souls of the wicked nations of the world and the animal souls of Israel, as mentioned above. Nevertheless, despite this apparent abundance of substance, in reality, its energizing power is not autonomous, God forbid. Rather, its power is derived indirectly from the power of holiness, as mentioned above. We went into chapter 6 and chapter 22, how everything in this world needs to get its power from God, and even the evil things in this world need to get their power from God, but they're given, so to speak, backhanded, because God is not really excited to give them. They exist out of necessity, not exist out of reality, meaning they exist for something else. They don't exist for themselves. They exist to create a test in this world. So let's continue. And that's why, being inherently devoid of substance, the Sitrach, or the other side, is eliminated completely by the presence of holiness, just as physical darkness is eliminated by physical light. So he continues, but if the Sitrach are so devoid of substance and power, why is it so difficult to overcome in our daily lives? And so he answers, only in the case of your divine soul's holy power of Chokhmah, God granted special permission to the Sitra Achra, to the other side of the animal soul, to have the ability to exert itself against the divine soul. So again, what he's saying, so how does it have power? God gave it permission. Why? So that you will be inspired to overcome it and bring down the Sitra Achra, the other side of your animal soul, through the above meditations of self-debasement, ego deflation, becoming disgusted in your eyes and repulsive. So he is saying, very importantly, that if the animal soul appears, and it appears powerful, that is only because God has given it the power in order that you can overcome it. And then he continues, and if you do this, God will help you, since with an awakening from below, there is an awakening from above, to fulfill the verse said of the Sitra Achra, if you lift yourself high like an eagle, from there I will bring you down, says God. How exactly will God bring the Sitra Achra down? Namely, he will take the Sitra Achra's power and ability away. In other words, how does he take it down? He doesn't have to push it down. He just removes its ability. It's very simple. Again, it all ties into what we're saying. It doesn't have an inherent power. By stripping it of the ability and permission it was given to exert itself over the divine soul's holy power, Chokhmah, and stripped of its power, it will be effortlessly banished and eliminated, just as the physical darkness is eliminated by physical light. Okay, so right away, it disappears. And now we're going to get a story from the Torah that brings this all home. A story from the Torah that presents to us that this is the truth, that faith is natural to us, and the way to reach faith is not as much by engaging the evil, but by telling it it has no standing, telling it it has no place, telling it it's foolish, it's hiding the truth. You generally don't gain by getting into a fist fight with let's just give an example. When it comes to Israel, let's say, do any of these debates that go on TV really do anything? Typically, they just create a bunch of sound bites that that each side is going to clip for themselves. You're almost never, each side is going to declare victory because they can clip the soundbite that they want. And sometimes you might debase yourself by coming out and screaming at each other. I'm not saying we should never engage in a debate, but generally in Judaism, we actually shied away from debates. We can go back historically, Christianity. There are times we have to engage, but generally, the way to deal with it is by telling our story. Post our story online. Talk about our story. Talk about who we are, our history, who we're dealing with, and tell people the truth that we are given a land by God. No, the truth is that just tell the truth. Actually, the Rabbi would say the real way to tell people about Israel is just tell them that God exists and that God gives us His land, and it's our land. The people don't want to accept it, won't accept it anyways. But the point that I'm trying to make is that, in general, a back and forth debates almost never work. And the same thing goes with our urges, our desires, our animal soul, our doubts, our questions. Though we should answer our questions and our doubts, questions and doubts are an intellectual pursuit, and I have done that. But in general, the urges of the evil inclination is really a smokescreen. It's really a show. Doesn't have true inherent power. And we just need to bring some positivity, some light, and generally the shadows disappear. The world doesn't operate like this. When it comes to Israel, you read about the anti-Semitism and what we're doing to fight anti-Semitism, and you have all these people that monitor anti-Semitism and spend their day deleting comments and talking about how bad anti-Semitism is and anti-Israelism, blah, 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 blah. But the most effective general route is everybody to be proud that they're Jewish and show the world that we're good people and show the world that and tell people the truth. That is the general way to deal with it. Fighting darkness head on is not usually the path. I'm not saying it's never the path. Same thing, by the way, is in bringing people closer to Judaism. There is an element and a segment of the population for whom you need to have lengthy discussions. But for most people, that get into Judaism, you work directly through the heart. You bring them for a Shabbat meal, put on tefillin, Shabbat candles. Usually, actually, what happens is the best way is actually they get involved. Then they have some questions and they get answers to their questions. But starting from the questions usually is not the path that works. All right, so let's show a story from the Torah that brings out this point. So he's going to tell us a story of the spies. So we all despise the spies, okay? So in the Torah, there's a story of the spies. There were the 10 spies that were sent to check out the land of Israel. And they came back and they gave a bad report. And the Jewish people started crying, boo-hoo, we don't want to go to Israel. We can't go. The spies said, even God cannot conquer the land. And then, if you look in the story there, Moshe gets very angry at them, tells them off, and says, you're never going to enter the land of Israel. And then suddenly they change their mind. Oh, we want to go to the land. We want to go. And then a bunch of people say, let's go. And they try to go even without Moses' permission. And so the Alter Rebbe is going to ask the question, what happened? What changed? Why did the Jews go from thinking they can never conquer the land to wanting to go to the land? So let's read this story. Let's read this inside. So he says like this. We find this idea clearly in the Torah concerning the spies sent to scout the land, who initially said, we are unable to go up against this people, for they are stronger than us. And the Talmud expounds their intent to mean, do not read stronger than us, but rather stronger than he, than God, suggesting they didn't believe in God's power to help them conquer the land. So listen to this. The people believed God himself cannot conquer the land. That's a crazy level of lack of faith. They didn't say we're not deserving. They didn't say we're not going to do it. They said, or God doesn't want. They said God himself cannot conquer the land. But afterwards, they retracted their position and said, we're ready to go up to the place that God spoke about. Numbers 14:40, right? So right after the story of the spies, the Jews say, we want to go up to the land. So the Alter Rebbe asks, how did they regain their belief in God's power? So anybody who remembers the story of the spies? Was there a miracle? Was it like the story of Korach, that the earth swallowed them up? Was it like Egypt, where the sea split? Was there manna falling from heaven? I mean, there was, but that wasn't connected to this. Moses, of blessed memory, had not shown them any miraculous sign or wonder in the interim period. So between Numbers 13:31 when they said we cannot go to the land, and Numbers 14:40 when they said we want to go, there's no mention in the Torah of any miracles. All he said to them was that God had become angry with them and had sworn not to bring them to the land. But of what persuasive power was this divine anger? If they didn't believe in God's power, heaven forfend, to help them conquer the 31 kings and occupied land. In other words, how did Moshe convince them? And Moshe said, God's angry at you. They don't believe God has power anyways. How does it change their mind? It's like, you meet a Jew and you tell them, I want to put on tefillin, mezuzah, kosher, or anything. I don't believe in anything. Then you tell them, so you're not really Jewish. Then they get all angry at you. So what do you mean you don't believe in God? Where's Judaism? What's this whole thing? You find that a lot. These people, they get angry if you deny their Jewishness. And it's the same thing here. Moshe comes to them. He doesn't perform any miracles. In fact, our sages say that even though the spies themselves died, they actually didn't die on the spot. They got sick about a month later. But that's for another time. So there was no miracles, no sign. All he said was, God is angry at you. Why would that change their mind? As the Tanya says, they didn't believe in God's power. And he continues, this is the reason why they didn't want to go to the land in the first place. They didn't believe in God. So this God, they didn't believe in his power. Suddenly they get all upset that God gets angry at them. It says, from where did they suddenly acquire faith? Which they, from where did they suddenly acquire faith which shortly beforehand seemed to be completely lacking? Nothing positive had happened to inspire them. By the way, I might do this for a sermon. I might just scream angrily at everybody. See how that works? No, I'm kidding. Rather, we can be certain that they didn't need to acquire faith, since Jews are inherently believers, the children of believers. Rather, it is only that the Sitra Achra found in their bodies exerted itself over the divine soul's holy light, and as a result of the Sitra Achra's inflated ego, arrogance, and irrational chutzpah, that is why they were denying God. It was irrational. And therefore, as soon as God became angry with them and was enraged with the thunderous voice of anger, saying, how much longer must I bear this evil congregation? Your corpses will fall in the desert. I, God, have spoken. I will do this to the entire evil congregation. Their hearts were humbled and broken inside them, hearing these harsh words. As the verse states, and the people mourned greatly, and as a result, the Sitra Achra fell from its power and its arrogance and inflated ego. The people didn't acquire faith through some inspirational event. Rather, their inherent faith surfaced due to a negative event, God's anger, which dismantled the Sitra Achra that blocked their faith. And the Jewish people are inherently believers. The Sitra Achra acted only as a superficial blockage to their faith. So here we have a case where people claim they did not even believe in God's power to conquer a land, and they changed their mind like this, not from any miracle, but just by hearing that God was angry at them. What does that tell you? That tells you that it was never rational to begin with. And therefore, the way to overcome the evil in their soul was not by giving them a rational argument. Oh, you think God's not powerful enough? He is powerful enough. That didn't work. In fact, Joshua and Caleb tried a rational argument. Didn't work. The Torah tells us, or the commentaries tell us, Joshua tried to tell them, look, if God told us to climb ladders to heaven, we would be able to do it. God brings the manna, God split the sea, he can bring us to the land of Israel. That argument didn't work. They shut up Joshua. Moses comes and tells them, God's angry at you. That they change their mind. What does this tell you? That sometimes the rational argument is not what's needed, because what's going on in your mind is not a rational issue. It's the evil inclination inflating itself to proportions that are not even realistic. To say that God cannot bring us into the land of Israel is not realistic. And so now that Tanya says that, and so we can learn from this story of the Torah to our own lives. From this, we can learn a lesson that when doubtful thoughts about faith pop into your head, remember they are just words emanating from the Sitra Achra, which has exerted itself over your divine soul. But Jews are inherently believers, the children of believers. And what is more, remember that the Sitra Achra itself is a servant of God and believes in God without any doubts at all. And it has only been granted permission by God to confuse you with lies and deception. And so that your reward for resisting its allure will be greater. In this respect, Sitra Achra, so before I get to that, the last part's an interesting one. So he says, this last part he's saying like this, not only is the evil inclination just inflating falsehood to test your faith, and therefore you push it off not by rational arguments, but just by pushing it away. He says even more, the sitra achra itself, the evil inclination itself, actually believes in God as well. It's pretending not to because its job is to test you. But even that voice in your head that is giving you the doubts, it itself believes in God. And as he brings, in this respect, the Sitrach is like a harlot who, with permission of the king, tries to seduce the king's son with lies and deception, as stated in the Zohar. See the end of chapter 9. So the end of chapter 9, we brought a story from the Zohar. The Zohar says that the evil within the world is like a harlot hired by the king. The king wanted to test his son's inner will, and therefore he hired a harlot to try and seduce his son, and to see if his son would be able to withstand it. And so the Zohar says the same thing as the evil inclination within us is there to test us and there to see if there to test us and there to see if we have the ability to overcome, and if we have the strength and the desire to push further. And as we spoke about, when we spoke about 2 weeks ago about sometimes we need to do more teshuvah, is that when we are faced with challenges, that's when our greatest strengths come out. That's when our greatest powers and abilities come out. So this wraps up this chapter, chapter 29, which is really about times when we need to break ourselves. Why do we need to break ourselves? As he started from the beginning, because your body, your animal soul, is giving you delusions. It's lifting itself up. If it's inflating itself up, it's like this big, you ever see these inflatables that you put up on your lawn? All you need to do is take a little needle, boop, and you pop it, and it'll disappear. And this is a lesson for ourselves. And I want to share now a video with I want to share this video with Herbert Weinreb. Herbert Weinreb passed away a couple of years ago. He wrote a book called 9.5 Mystics. Very interesting book. He was a conservative rabbi, and he interviewed the Rebbe as part of his 9.5 Mystics. I honestly haven't read the book. I actually do want to read it, but he had this book. I don't own it, but I should get it one of these days. He says it's very interesting. But he interviewed the Rebbe as part of interviewing mystics. And later on in his life, he actually became Orthodox, and he had a lot of conversations with the Rebbe. And in this video, he kind of brings up this idea of how do, say, other streams of Judaism answer a question. And so other streams of Judaism might say, is it really real? Is it not really real? Are we really sure? We're not really sure. But if you ask, he says, really the real answer is that if you have a question of faith or a question about mitzvah or a truth of something, is tell like it is. It's true. It's real. Or do we have to do these mitzvahs? Yes. Maybe you're not ready to do it, but we do. So let's take a look at this video. And again, because I said all this chapter really ties into how we deal with when we're trying to bring ourselves closer to Judaism or someone else. Is what's the way to deal with it? And the way to deal with it is always to be sure of yourself. As we see here, the doubts are not really real because we believe that the faith is innate. Now, if you say, Rabbi, is that really true? Listen, Chabad has been doing this for many years and it's working pretty well. Again, there are some people that need to work through their doubts first, but for most people, it's not the direct path or the first path. Let's take a look here.
Adler is the author of 9.5 Mystics.
Go back.
Which will be given by them.
He's the author of 9.5 Mystics. He served as the leader of a reform.
The Rebbe's point.
Adler is the author of 9.5 Mystics. He served as the leader of a reform congregation.
This is not, it's not showing the video. So let's do that one more time. I know there was something I had to do to let people show videos. So I don't know what's going on. There was some setting, I guess I I'd have to change it again. All right, we'll listen to it. It's 2 minutes. You can survive 2 minutes without seeing the screen.
Congregation in New Jersey for 40 years.
Discussion with the Rebbe about the differences between Chabad and between, let us say, Reform or conservative movements. I believe that the Rebbe's point was that when you have a question and you ask that question of Reform or conservative, the answer which will be given by them is that this possibility, you can go this way, you can go that way, you can do this much, you can do more or less, but you're left open and invited to make your own choice and not to be guilty about making such a choice. Whereas with the Rebbe, he also gives you, he also gave a person who came to him and asked questions, he also gave them, options. If they didn't want to or couldn't do all the mitzvot at once at that time, he gave them the option of doing what they could at that time, and then gradually trying more and more to approach what was fully asked of us by the Ribono Shel Olam. I asked the Rebbe why it seems that so many people cannot have the kind of faith that a chassid has. And the Rebbe tried to say that they are afraid of the consequences of their faith. They don't have the faith because they don't want to change their lives. People want to go on as they are. So that is why they simply will not take a leap of faith, so to speak. I asked the Rebbe what advice he could have for people who do want to make some sort of a return to Judaism. And the Rebbe's answer was, he invoked the image of Elijah the prophet, who, when trying to give instruction to the Jewish people on faith, said to them, do not try to dance between two opinions, to dance on two legs, so to speak, but take your stand firmly, even if you can't do it all at once. Nevertheless, take your stand and say, this is the Torah, these are the commandments, this is what I will gradually try to accomplish, and be wholehearted about it.
So the point of 2 points brought out there that really tie into our chapter. And again, it all ties into the point of the chapter is that inherently we believe. He says, number one, someone asks you a question. If you're wishy-washy and just tell people we're not sure, we believe, whatever's this, whatever's that, you're not giving them a straightforward answer. And that's not going to tie into their inner faith. And so then they might do something, might not do something. And so the Rebbe says you have to tell people the whole truth. And this is the truth. This is the Torah. This is the truth of everything. On Shabbos, can you really not ride in a car? Yes. Are you up to there? Is another story. What you're ready to do? Take one mitzvah at a time. Sure. Tell people to do one mitzvah. Tell people to take a choice to do one mitzvah at a time. But don't tell them that what to believe is a choice. That's very dangerous. And that's what our chapter says. You're not going to work that way. We're not really sure if Shabbos fully you have to do this, but we do it. You have to be very, 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 very serious about what we believe in. Number one. Number two is another point that a lot of people choose not to believe. Again, it's not intellectual, the Rebbe said. A lot of people choose not to believe because they're afraid of the consequences of saying they believe. Because if you say you believe, then you become beholden to acting in that belief. And so you'll try to find all types of reasons. And I could tell you, I know many people who became not religious, and most of them, it's not an intellectual pursuit. There were many other factors at play, and the intellectual questions are secondary. And I believe the same thing happens when people come back. A lot of times, it's not the intellectual pursuit that's at play, though it is. What I mean is the specific doubts. Sure, you want to understand Judaism, you want to understand the laws, and you want to understand. There's a difference between understanding and assuaging your doubts. But understanding how God created the world in 5785 and how that's not a contradiction to evolution is not the same as saying, if I assuage my problems of evolution, then I'll believe. It's two separate things. I want to believe. I want to understand also how that works. All right, so then you have an answer. It's two different ways of looking at it. And so I think we have to remind ourselves and tell ourselves and understand that, as this chapter tells us, is that in truth we believe. We want to always further our understanding, and we always want to further our acceptance and doing the mitzvos, and recognize sometimes that we are pausing and putting up walls and saying we don't believe because we don't want to act upon it, but realize that in truth, deep down, we do believe. And therefore, if you believe, the best thing for you and me and all of us would be to slowly acting upon our faith and allowing our true self to allow itself to reveal itself. So thank you so much for coming. And I plan to do a class tomorrow night, Wednesday night, 7:30 p.m. on Purim, the laws of Purim and the mystical meaning of Purim, the holiday of Purim. So hopefully you'll join us for that.